You can hear Leave It in the Ring radio every Thursday night, 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 Pacific. David Duenez, Gabriel Montoya, great job on the show. You can go to leaveitintherringradio.com for more information and to hear the show. But before you listen to tonight's show, listen to David Duenez right here on the Sports Buffet podcast. We talk about the Pacquiao fight upcoming this week. We review the Tarver fight and just talk more with one of the best guys in the business, David Duenez, on the Sports Buffet podcast.
Always love to talk to Dave Duenez. Leave It in the Ring radio comes on every Thursday, 8 Eastern, 5 Pacific. Dave, always a great show when we can hear you and Gabriel Montoya talk boxing. And this is quite the active week with fights to review and fights to preview. So let's get a head start on it. Showtime this past week. All I can say is, boy, am I glad I didn't have to pay for those 4 fights.
I liked Santa Cruz. I think, but the thing is that you hear a lot of people already jumping on the bandwagon saying new superstar. I say hold up a little bit, be a little bit more reserved. Got to see a little bit more. Got to see him step up competition. But he's definitely an exciting kid. I think he's. His fight did set a tone where there were decent fights. There weren't bad fights. When you got competitive fights, they're not always going to be one-sided blowouts. There's not going to be quick knockouts. They're normally going to be fights that are going to have back and forth, a momentum of hesitation, because there's always something on the line.
Austin Trout was in fight number 2. A lot of people have talked about maybe he's the guy to fight Canelo now after the unfortunate accident with Paul Williams, which we'll talk about. But did he do enough, in your opinion, to step up to the Canelo sweepstakes in September?
The thing is that Austin Trout is he's a very solid champion. Is he an exciting champion? No. He's a guy that comes and gets the job done. He's very sound in his boxing skills. He's not a guy that's gonna really make mistakes or risk to impress the friendly fans out there that are looking for an explosion. Canelo's a little bit different. He's the kind of guy that has more explosion to him, and that's why he's been put on television a lot more. Austin Trout is very content. I would have to say he's a conservative assassin. Has he won his spot? Has he deserved his spot? I think so. Is it going to be one of those fights, though, that everybody's going to be clamoring away to get to because they want to sit down and watch these two guys go at it? No, it's not going to be one of those. It is definitely going to be a very, very competitive fight. It's a fight that Canelo can possibly lose and look terrible against because he's going to be facing a guy that does have skills and is at that level of competition where it can really expose Canelo and where he's at. A lot of times people confuse numbers and popularity as in skills that pay the bills. Austin Trout definitely has those type of skills. He may not have the star power, but he definitely has the boxing skill in his category, and that sometimes is a lot more heavier and a lot more loud than a superstar Canelo.
I think a lot of diehard fans are probably diehard boxing fans are probably going to buy Canelo no matter who he faces. I think Paul Williams obviously would have gotten a lot of buys. James Kirkland maybe a few less. But I think the more and more you lose these names, it's harder to where it seems like to me Golden Boy is really going to have to try to load that undercard as well in September. Am I wrong or am I right, or is there a dark horse name out there that you think could be a sensational fight?
There's a lot of names out there at 154. That's the beauty about 154, even at 160. There's guys at 160 that would be willing to drop down to face the cash cow, Saul Canelo Alvarez. There's a guy that he's been avoided for quite some time. There's 2 guys, actually, that have been avoided quite some time, among Golden Boy fighters and among other promotional fighters that are promoted by bigger promoters. And, the first name comes to my head is Isha Shea Smith, who's been campaigning between 154 and 160. He's been taking on whatever is available. Now that he's with, the Floyd Mayweather team, he may have a little bit more of an easier way of kind of sneaking in and getting some matches. But there's a name that a lot of people are not asking for. There's a name that a lot of people are not wanting to go after. I mean, Peter Quillen contested that. He didn't want anything to do with Isisei Smith. Another guy is a Cuban kid, you know, Erislandy Lara. There's a guy that is giving fits to a lot of people, you know, and he hasn't even been mentioned. He hasn't even been thought of just because he's a southpaw. He's slick. He counterpunches very well, and he can really make a lot of people look terrible. Carlos Molina, the king, the guy that almost upset James Kirtland in his last fight, and had, you know, James really kind of digging deep in his gut to pull it off. Carlos Molina is a valuable name. He's a guy right there from Warriors Entertainment that can definitely give Canelo a run for his money. You know, this guy is rugged. He can counterpunch, and he's a valiant puncher. We talk about Paul Williams, you know, who hopefully gets a speedy recovery. He was a valiant puncher, but there was something a little bit different about Carlos Molina. He was short, stocky, short arms, and he was a guy that would push you back, pressure you, and land a lot of shots. Where Paul Williams was a different type of vibe, a different type of fighter. Tall, lanky, needed, you know, he would shoot downwards because he's so tall, so he left his chin more vulnerable. Carlos Molina is not going to give you those openings. So there are names out there that Saul Canelo Alvarez can fight, but you got to look at the overall with Golden Boy. I think they've kind of finally figured out that they put too much stock in their young fighters and rushed them a bit too quick, and then at the end, their running horse falls back at the last.
What are they saving Canelo's O for, if you get my drift? I mean, how long do they protect him, and where do they have that undefeated mark really questioned?
You know, Floyd Mayweather, he was incarcerated right now doing 90 days for a plea deal that he did for domestic violence. They could possibly be saving that O for Floyd. You know, that could be one of the biggest fights out there next to a Manny Pacquiao. How big could it be? We really don't know yet. Until Canelo really kind of is able to get somebody that can really challenge him and catch the imagination, not just from the Mexican people, but for overall the whole world, the way Manny Pacquiao is done, then I think we have a valuable, we have a very intriguing and possibly a super fight. He's a young kid, 21 years old. Maybe, you know, 2 years down the line at 23, he might be available and he might be ready. You know, I say don't rush the gold rush with this kid.
Right.
Take some time, dig some ditches, let the water run through there, and possibly, you know, after panning, you're going to find some gold.
What happens first, Pacquiao and Mayweather, or Chavez Jr. and Canelo?
Oh, definitely. I would have to say Chavez Jr. and Canelo, but you know we got to remember Sergio Martinez has first dibs on Julio Cesar Chavez Jr. And that's if he gets past Andy Lee. Andy Lee's a very tough customer. He's a kid that you shouldn't really look over. You can't look past him because you know, we all know the Irishmen. They come to fight. They don't come to sit down and have a beer with you. They come to try to break your jaw.
Yeah, I asked Felix Stern when he got in there with Matthew Macklin lately, which I saw on replay the other day. You know, Matthew Macklin just flat out robbed in that fight, most likely. But anyway, back to recent events. What's next for Kid Chocolate, and did Winky Wright make the smart decision calling it a day, or should he have even really called it a fight against Quillen?
You know, he should have even came back from his retirement, to tell you the truth. I mean, which wasn't really a retirement. He was having a tough time getting a fight. You know, I think I thought he gave a very tough outing. He went out on his shield. He didn't get dropped. I mean, he got dropped, but he didn't look that awful. You know, it wasn't like a real beat down, but you could definitely see the reflexes weren't there. He did have the size, you know, he's a big guy, still had some pretty good defense, but the pop, which he never really carried. But he had, you know, in his prime when he fought like Fernando Vargas and he fought, you know, Shane Mosley and he fought Tito Trinidad, even though he was always said not to have a lot of pop, he had enough pop to keep you at distance, to keep you humble, to really kind of confuse you with his jab. And his jab is what really set off the combinations. With Peter Quillen, the Kid Chocolate, you could really see that he had a lot more fudge in his game than anything else, you know, where Kid Chocolate had more of the sugar. He was able to go up, tee off, and use combinations. But then again, you know, this is Kid Chocolate fighting another guy. You know, either the guy's been defeated before or the guy's coming out of retirement. So not too impressed with Kid Chocolate. Kid Chocolate, in my opinion, needs to step it up. He needs to get his head in the game and stop worrying about how many tweet followers you have.
What do you think of the main event with Tarver and Latif?
You know, I got to tell you this, man. Even though a lot of people were bagging on the main event with Tarver and Latif, I actually really enjoyed it just because there was a lot of tension in it. There was a lot of emotions. And, when you get a lot of emotions, it's not going to always be super special, but then you're going to see a little bit of drama in there. We saw a little bit of drama. We saw a little bit of, Johnny Tapia, rest in peace, in Latif. He was talking to the crowd. He was, egging on, Antonio Tarver. Antonio Tarver did start off really, really slow. I thought he kind of gave maybe 3 or 4 rounds in the beginning, but he was having a tough time. Latif, he really needed to kind of, settle down in those later rounds. I think he just went for the gusto because of the fact there was a lot of emotions, even though he did seem really disciplined. But at the same time, though, how long do you stay disciplined? He was punching on a lot of gloves, and he was punching at a lot of air. And that could become a bit discouraging and frustrating that sometimes it can lead a fighter just to step out of his game plan and just try to make something happen, try to create something. But sometimes when you create something, you try to make things happen, you can go overboard. And I think that's what happened with Teeth. I wasn't really upset with the draw. I thought it was a reasonable call from the judges. I'd like to see a rematch, though. If not, I want to see what Tarver plans on doing next.
What would you advise him to do next?
I think as always, champions, if there's just an eighth of a gap of doubt, an eighth of a gap of you could have done better, a true champion will go back into the ring and shut all criticism, or even shut the fighter that says you didn't beat me, you didn't get the best of me, and I think that's always going to be hovering over Antonio Tarver. But he's an older warrior, and he's one of those kind of guys that I've been there, I've done that, and I even think with the post interview with Jim Gray, it left a bad taste for Antonio Tarver. He was taking shots at, not only was the Teeth was taking shots at the hand that feeds him, but he was also taking shots at Antonio Tarver's, partners in crime, which is the commentators, that are alongside the ringside.
Well, if I was, go ahead.
Antonio, I just don't see Antonio want to react like a champion. I think he's going to react more like a human being.
Yeah, and if I was, from what I heard from Showtime's exec, Latif Coyote should not be making any plans to fight on Showtime anytime soon. But go ahead.
I was just going to say, you never beat the hand that feeds you. But, I think, too, that Showtime has to understand and realize that there's a lot of emotion.
Right.
And fighters, they discipline themselves. They literally shut down everything that's in them when they're in training camp. And, when the outcome doesn't sway their way, we have seen this happen in Showtime, who has been putting up excellent cards, competitive cards, okay? With Orlando Solido and with Juan Lopez, we saw exactly what happened with Lopez. He got stopped, and what happened? The emotions just came out. So this is what happens when you have a guy that puts everything on the line, that trains hard, and he has expectations, and those expectations are not met. What do we all do? We end up turning back into a 3 to 5 year old kid and start pounding our legs and our knees and our hands on the floor. And that's what we got with Latif. Well, I wouldn't be too harsh on the kid.
Yeah, before we get to this weekend's fights, one thing I'll say on Tarver, and I have a feeling you're going to probably agree with me, I would have no real interest in fighting anyone that names rhymes with Pichko and is from the Ukraine.
I wouldn't. You know what? Antonio Tarver talks a great game.
I know that's where the money is.
Remember? Yeah, that's definitely where the money is. And if you remember, his nemesis back in the late '90s was Roy Jones Jr. Right. Roy Jones at the time used to flirt with the fact of I'm going to fight Holyfield, or I'm going to fight Mike Tyson, I'm going to fight Lennox Lewis. I think Antonio Tarver just wants to keep himself relevant, and the way you keep yourself relevant is by talking a little bit more than what you should do. He's also the same thing with Bernard Hopkins. Bernard Hopkins was talking about fighting David Hay. I think this is just a tactic of keeping themselves in the news, keep people talking about him, whether it's positive or negative. But in all reality, I don't see Antonio Tarver. I mean, he looked a little chubby, even at a cruiserweight. It didn't look completely unfit, but it did work for him. To me, moving up to heavyweight, he's going to have to put on muscle, not baby fat.
Just for argument's sake, if he were to go up to heavyweight, give me a decent name that you think he could beat. or that would be competitive?
You know, I mean, if you want to talk about decent names, you know, Eddie Chambers is fighting Thomas Adamek pretty soon, and if he's successful, either one of those guys, I would try to go after the winner. You know, these guys are smaller heavyweights. Antonio Tarver, that's what you want to gear for. You know, you don't want to go for these super heavyweights. You want to go for the you know, normal average heavyweights, which are guys that are 6'1", 6'2", and you could possibly get away with using your legs and your movement. They still do pack up a big punch, but Eddie Chambers is not known for being a power puncher. So those are guys that I would probably try to go after and look at. Even Chaz Witherspoon's another name that you can possibly get in the mix with. But like young guns like Seth Mitchell, who have shown they have power that can just turn a fight with one punch, those are the kind of guys you want to avoid. So Antonio Tarver, going into heavyweight, is it possible? Of course, it's possible. That's why we have matchmakers. Matchmakers make great matchmaking, and they know their fighters. They know their, you know, they know what their capabilities are. You know, they know the negatives and the positives. With Antonio Tarver, he knows his negatives and his positives. You know, he's a 40-something-year-old man. He's been in the game long enough to know his abilities that he can do in the ring and outside the ring. And reality sometimes can fuzz their minds a little bit because of the punches they've taken over the years. But I don't see that with Antonio Tarver. I kind of see him a little bit smarter than that and willing to go, if I go to a heavyweight, I'm going to have to test the waters with a small heavyweight.
I agree with you 100%, Dave. Would you throw David Hayes' name in there? I mean, I know he's a little bit bigger, but he's not really. I wouldn't call him a super heavyweight. Me.
Right.
Would
you know? I mean, why not? I think David Hayes would take it up. I mean, he fought, John Louise, the quiet man.
Right.
Antonio Tarver is just another name for him to, pad into his record. And it wouldn't make a great money fight, especially in the UK. Antonio Tarver is pretty well known. Even in the US, a lot of Americans that are not in tune with boxing, and they hear, Antonio Tarver, the guy that knocked out Roy Jones, and he's moving up to heavyweight, they're going to buy into it, and so that's why a lot of these fighters do decide, I'm going to flirt with it. If I'm big enough and I can make it, why not flirt with it, So, if anything, Antonio Tarver, he could definitely move up, but I just don't see him being successful. It's another James Toney, can probably give a lot of guys fits, give a lot of guys problems, but moving up with the big boys, like the Klitschko's, he's going to find himself on his back.
Yeah, and I hope Antonio Tarver can't get as fat as James Toney got, because if so, I really want to buy stock in whatever fast food franchise Antonio Tarver is eating at. But I like Adamek as my favorite name, personally. Let's move on to this weekend. Friday night, it starts with Kelly Pavlik headlining ESPN2, ironically against a guy, Dave, from my hometown of Lynchburg, Virginia. How do you see Kelly Pavlik? Can he be relevant again?
The name itself is relevant. Whether or not we can see Kelly get back into a boxing mode where we think, okay, he can be a threat. Well, I like the pace that Top Rank is doing it, though. They're starting him off the way he did before. When he really didn't have a big name. He still got a big punch. So any guy with a big punch and can land that big punch is always going to be a threat. So I like to see what he does this Friday night. With his last fight being with under the tutelage of Robert Garcia, we kind of saw that he had a little bit more bounce to his legs, but a guy against named Jedi, who really wasn't even there to fight, it's really hard to read.
Was Jack Lowe a scapegoat, or was Jack Lowe really part of the problems?
Only them two are going to know.
Right.
But in all reality, the guy had an addiction, still has an addiction. There's no such thing as, curing an addiction. There's only a thing of controlling an addiction. So Kelly Pavlik probably needs to do his, step number 9,
right,
which is go back, and apologize to everybody he's done lawfully wrong. I think Jack Lowe, man, has treated him like a son. And, sometimes as sons, we make bad decisions against our fathers because we feel like, they're just trying to take too much control of my life, and I know how to deal with life, even though I'm young and dumb. Eventually, Kelly Pavlik, I think he's going to wake up, understand where Jack Lowe put him at, helped him in what area, and what he was trying to do for him. But only those two really know what happens. There's two decides to acquire him, you know, I've always been told that by my father, so we don't know. I don't know if he was much of a big problem, but me thinking, I don't think he was.
Shane Mosley was a good matchup for Vernon Forrest. Mayorga was a good Forrest was a good matchup for Mayorga. Hopkins was a good matchup for Taylor. Taylor was a good matchup for Pavlik. Does that make Jermaine Taylor overrated in the grand scheme of things?
You know what? I've never had thought that Jermaine Taylor was overrated. But there is a such thing as rushing fighters to be great. You know, when you see great potential out of fighters, the way to build them is to gradually build them. You know, I mean, if you look back in our history in boxing, it's taking guys to kind of hit that peak, you know, more or less in 30 or 40 fights, you know. Jermaine Taylor was the kind of guy that they they rushed him, but at the same time, when they got him at a peak where they were supposed to, you know, excel him because they got what they were looking for, they didn't excel him. What they did is they held them back. They put the reverse gears on them and ended up putting them in with guys that were even natural 160. That ruins guys. You know, unfortunately, that does ruin fighters. You know, what happens is they end up fighting, they end up turning their boxing mode into the mode that the guys that they're facing. So they end up fighting at that level. And when that happens, then they're not familiar with themselves. They don't know what to do anymore. And that can leave them vulnerable. So Jermaine Taylor, that's what we saw. That's what happened. We even seen that with Lushan Boutte getting knocked out with Carl Foch. That's a perfect example right there. I'm talking about the present right now is that here's a guy that had a lot of potential, a lot of promising, but when you match him up too soft and you match him up not equally and you protect them too long, that when the day they're supposed to step up, the day they're supposed to show they have greatness, they fall apart and they crumble.
We'll play underrated, overrated more at a later date, but let's talk about the last topic at hand, the Manny Pacquiao fight on Saturday. Before we talk about Pacquiao and Bradley real quick, is there anything on the undercard that makes you jump up and down or even get out of the recliner?
Nothing really makes me jump up and down in the undercard, you know. Some solid fights. I like Mike Jones. He's going to be fighting Randall Bailey. Randall Bailey definitely has a right hand that can turn off the lights of Mike Jones. But Mike Jones has fought some pretty, you know, tough cookies. You know, Jesus Soto Caras, he was a rugged, tough guy. Come forward, always on top of you. Gave Mike Jones, you know, a run for his money the first match, but Mike Jones made those adjustments in the rematch, and we saw what happened. He was the victor. Randall Bailey, this time around, is going to have his hands full. Mike Jones can definitely outbox him. He could probably even stop the older warrior. But I wouldn't be too comfortable with Randall Bailey because we've seen him. They call him Mr. KO for a reason. He could definitely knock out Mike Jones. But I don't see that happening. I honestly see Mike Jones' jabs just taking over, keeping him at bay, and really dictating the fight. Is it going to be an exciting fight? Probably not.
How about the main event? Is that going to be an exciting fight?
It could go either way. It could be a foul fest, or it can be an exciting fight. I'm expecting something explosive. I'm expecting something exciting. Even though with Timothy Bradley, you know, a lot of folks don't know about him, and they just kind of go judge him off a fight they saw him once on HBO with Devin Alexander, and they label him as a headbutter or he's a bore fest. All he does is hug. If you watch all his other fights, he's been in a really exciting fights. Junior Witter, from Nate Campbell, from Kendall Hall. This guy's exciting. You know, he comes to fight. I like Timothy Bradley a whole lot in this match. And the reason why I like is because I think he's getting Manny Pacquiao at the right moment, at the right time. And Manny and them, they didn't want this fight. They wanted to avoid this fight. Freddie Foot Rose did not want to do anything to do with it, but they were left with Timothy Bradley. And what they're getting from Timothy Bradley is a prime, hungry, and a guy that knows how to adjust. And the one thing that Timothy Bradley holds and carries among a lot of other fighters out there is that he listens to his watchtower, and his watchtowers are his trainers, guys that tell him what he's doing wrong and guys that tell him what he needs to do right. And when you do that, and when you have a good listening ears, that's going to go a long way in boxing. And a lot of fighters can be a bit stubborn and egotistic, where they go, no, I'm going to do it my way, and I'm going to go out there, and they kind of show a little bit more balls than intelligence. Timothy Bradley has shown a little bit too much balls in some aspects of his fights, but I think with Joel Diaz, who he's been with for quite some time now, this guy's talk about underrated as a trainer. This guy is probably one of the best trainers out there. So not only does Manny have his hands full, Freddie Roach does too. He's going to have to be matching wits with Joel Diaz. And I think their game plan, what they're planning to do with Manny Pacquiao, it's going to be pretty solid. I don't expect these guys to come in with one game plan. I expect them to come in with three.
Well, very rarely, do you get out of an Amir Khan fight and move up in the ranks, because Bradley and Khan was talked about hot and heavy, and that fight didn't happen. But I'm not trying to call you out or anything, but correct me if I'm wrong, Bradley Alexander, though, is not the only time a Tim Bradley fight has ended with a headbutt.
No, it didn't. I mean, Nate Campbell is another fight that ended with a headbutt, but, the guy's only 5'6", and the guy likes to go to the body, and when you have that, when you have a guy that's aggressive, that's willing to open up and leave his face open to land some body shots, and, with Alexander's case, he's a southpaw. The headbutts do happen, but if you look at the replays, some people, the thing is that, okay, it's a headbutt, but those are not intentional headbutts.
Right.
Those are headbutts trying to land a shot. There's a huge difference.
Well, and I don't think Bradley's a dirty fighter. I wasn't trying to imply that, but, Evander Holyfield used to hit some people with the old noggin as well. And, I mean, we can talk, was Evander a dirty fighter or not? I don't think so, but, I mean, the heads just fly every now and again. It's unfortunate because I think Bradley, amongst, not the super intellects like yourself, and I'm not going to put myself in super intellect category, but I think a lot of people hear headbutt. I think a lot of people hear headbutt and they think, oh, Bradley's a dirty fighter. But like you said, I don't think that's the case. Now, let me put you on the record here and put you on the hot seat. Are you saying Bradley beats Pacquiao?
Oh, I'm picking Timothy Bradley to actually stop.
Wow. To stop him?
And, I'm picking him to stop him in the late rounds. I think that Manny's he's in the right beam right now to be stopped. There's a lot of things in this match, and I know some folks are going to go like, "Who is this guy? This guy's an idiot," because he's saying this, But one thing people are going to throw at me, well, he doesn't have power. He's too small. He's moving up to the 100 from 140 guys. He was fighting in amateurs at 152. Another thing, too, is that, he wasn't sitting on his punches. Why? Because he had to be a little bit more elusive. That's what he wanted to do. Be elusive, land some combinations. But we've seen guys start trailing away from him. Alexander was one of them. This is a big 140-pound kid. But once he started once those body shots started landing in those headshots, we saw him get on that bicycle and go backwards. So, does he have one-punch knockout power? No, he just doesn't. But he does have definitely that kind of power that can just be kind of a gnat and buzz in your face a little too long where it makes you sit down.
Final question for you, Dave, and I'll preface by saying I don't think you're crazy, so I'll definitely have you back on. And if Bradley beats Pacquiao, you might be I might start a Sports Buffet Hall of Fame and make you the first inductee, because I do think it takes some stones to make that pick when, a lot of people think, Manny, like Marsha. I mean, a lot of people love Pacquiao. If Bradley stops him, though, what becomes the most sought-after fight in boxing? Is it still Pacquiao and Mayweather, or does that change?
Well, definitely it's going to put a stop. The steam is not going to be as hot with Floyd Mayweather and Manny Pacquiao, but the steam could be with Floyd Mayweather and Timothy Bradley. Or if the fight is just that good, if the fight was just that great, if the fight was that competitive and back and forth, we could see a Manny Pacquiao versus Timothy Bradley. Why? Because they're both under the same banner.
Right.
But Timothy Bradley, if he's successful at this fight, it's opened a lot of doors for him. He can get Victor Ortiz. He can get Miguel Cotto. He can definitely get, Timothy Bradley again at 147. There's a lot of options here for Timothy Bradley. Not just on a victory, but on performance-wise. If the performance is good, if the performance is stellar, win or lose, Timothy Bradley can make a huge statement of saying, I'm campaigning and I'm staying at 147.
Dave, we'll be watching. Hopefully we can review it on next week. As always, thanks for your time. And any plug of who we're going to have on Leave It in the Ring tomorrow?
I don't have any names right now. We're still working at it.
That's why you got to tune in.
I know. That's one of the reasons why a lot of people got to tune in. I mean, we always have guests that just come on the fly on Leaving the Ring. It's a live show, so you never know what happens on Leaving the Ring.
And tell listeners again where we can hear that.
You can go to leavingtheringradio.com.
Dave, as always, I enjoyed it, and we will talk to you soon.
Oh, brother, thank you.